There we go, that's good enough. Alright guys, so, there we go. Today's video is going to be pretty different from all the other ones for a few reasons. One of them mostly, I had a whole lot, I was pretty surprised, I had a lot of feedback over this week with a bunch of different questions. And because there were so many questions that I got from the last few videos, I wanted to kind of devote, let me fix that a little bit, kind of devote this video, hey babe, kind of devote this video to answering some of those questions. And then, because a lot of the questions revolved around the effigies that we talked about, I'm also going to do a little presentation on them, talk about them a little bit more. But most of it's going to be answering questions because there were a lot of them. Man, let me write my notebook. There we go. I told y'all I'm professional, so I always have everything I need right before I start. But, so, just going to take a minute to answer a few of the questions. Some of the questions I have, if you remember, I talked about, as an experiment, putting some of these videos on YouTube. And I've only put 2 of them on YouTube so far. Really not gotten... They haven't gotten that much attention or anything on YouTube, which is fine by me. I just wanted to see if it would work. And I have gotten a few more messages about the 2 videos I put on there. So we're just going to go through the list and answer some of the questions I got real quick. And the first question I got is kind of silly. Not because it's a dumb question, just because it's a question I did not expect. As y'all know, pretty much in every video, I always have tea with me. And that's mostly just because I have bad allergy problems. So whenever I talk a lot, my throat gets dry real quick. And because I'm talking so much, I always like to have something to drink. So I always have tea with me. And the first question, the reason I brought that up, they wanted to know what kind of tea I'm drinking in each of the videos. So, it's this brand. I don't know how well it shows up. But it's a chocolate black tea. It's called Unique and Uncommon Harney and Sons Fine Teas. And it's absolutely delicious. It is an amazing tea. I mostly just drink it 1 because I love chocolate, 2 I love tea, and 3 it just tells my throat since I'm talking so much. So that was the first question. The second question kind of relates to that one, and it's actually from the same person. They were watching my pottery video. And they had 2 questions. The first one they had was, the cups that I'm always holding when I do these videos, are they some that I've made? And the answer is yes. Pretty much every cup I use, aside from normal drinking glasses, are ones that I've made myself. And the reason for that, mostly, is just kind of it's just a personal thing. It's just more fun drinking out of something that you made than going out and buying a mug. But that was one of the other questions. The second question that they asked about pottery, relating to pottery, was I mentioned a lot of the different styles, and they were wanting to know exactly where those styles kind of carry over among different cultures. And I messaged them back because I wasn't really sure what they were asking, and we kind of talked about it a little more. And basically what they were wanting to know is, in a lot of the videos, we always talk about how a lot of the beliefs and a lot of the stuff that they do carries over pretty much globally. Curiosities and Tea. That'd be a good question. Or a good, that'd be a good name. But, in pretty much all these videos, we always touch up on more than one culture. And what I'm always sure to mention is that a lot of their beliefs and a lot of the stuff they do, you can find that in well, not really millions, but hundreds of different cultures. Their same beliefs, same practices, a bunch of stuff carries over. And what they were wanting to know when it comes to pottery, what all carries over. And oh, that's fine. You can share it. Which before I go any further, I do want to say that real quick. I want to apologize because it just was brought to my attention the other day. I thought these videos, when I go live, they're automatically made public. I didn't know that they were set to private. So now I made sure everything's set to public. The live stream as well should be public. So sorry about that. Got all that fixed up now, though, and I'll be sure to watch that in the future. But back to answering the question. They were wanting to know, when it comes to pottery, what kind of techniques and what kind of stuff in pottery carries over among different cultures. And what we find, there's really only one culture that has techniques and does things with their pottery that isn't really global. And that's mostly in Japan. Japanese pottery, they did stuff with their pottery that we do not see in other cultures that use and practice pottery. In Japan, we find techniques and practices that's really unique just to Japan. And I did a whole video about that, but just in case you don't remember, one of those techniques is the process of enameling. And I forget the Japanese word. I'm really bad at pronouncing other languages. But there's a Japanese term for it. And basically what it would roughly translate to is pot welding. And what that is, this is a unique practice to Japan. And if you remember, what we said was, in Japan, pottery was an incredibly valuable thing. If somebody took the time to make you a plate, plates were huge in Japan. We do see tea sets, teacups all over the place, but decorative plates was one of the biggest things that we find in Japan, especially ancient Japan, when it comes to pottery. And most of the time they're doing ceramic or porcelain practices. But what we find, because porcelain is so delicate, it's very easy to break, but it is an amazing thing to make pots out of. Porcelain is one of my favorite things to use. I'll use it before I use any other clay if possible. But the problem with porcelain, it's not as strong, it's not as durable. It holds heat really well. Don't get me wrong on that. It just can't take as much of a beating. Like if you dropped a porcelain cup, plate, anything, it's going to shatter. If I dropped this stoneware teacup that I made, it might get a crack in the glaze itself, but it probably wouldn't break because it's a really durable clay. But back on topic, in Japan, what we find, because porcelain's what they mostly use, they made a pottery technique called pot welding, which that's not their word for it, that's our word for it. And what this is, because pottery was so valuable and so sentimental, if, let's say, somebody gave me a plate, curiosity, Jackson, that is awesome. I'm going to have to do that. But what we find, let's say that I'm in feudal Japan, and I was given a porcelain or ceramic plate, a decorative plate, as a gift. And it breaks. Because of its value, what I'm going to have to do in turn is do the pot welding. And what that means, I take something precious to me. And most of the time, when they do this technique, when they do this pottery technique, they're going to be taking precious metals, be it jewelry, just precious trinkets like coins, just raw minerals. They're going to take precious metals, even if it's their own precious jewelry, and they're going to melt it down. And they're going to take, let's say silver earrings. They melted that down into silver. They're going to take those earrings they just melted down, and they're going to use it as glue and basically weld that broken plate back together. And it's their belief that, yes, this was a precious plate, I broke it, but I just melted down something valuable and precious to me, silver. Use that to fix the plate. I made it a lot more precious and a lot more valuable and beautiful. So now it's even cooler. But even with that in mind, even though that was kind of their belief with pottery, they wouldn't go around breaking stuff. But it was their belief if they broke it, they had to do the pot welding, and it made it a lot more beautiful and a lot more valuable. So that's one of those techniques that we do not see carried over in a lot of cultures. That's pretty unique to Japan. And we do, modern day, we will use that practice. Potters, I've done it a few times myself. I don't have any pieces I've done it with, just because it is a very expensive and it's pretty hard to do. But modern day, we do that practice. When we're talking about our ancient and historic cultures, that's unique to Japan. That didn't really carry over. Another one that we kind of find that really doesn't carry over would be in Egypt. And that really just has to do with where they're from. When we think of our other indigenous people, like our Native Americans, your Aztecs, Mayans, they're in, excuse me, they're in areas where they have a lot more resources they can go and get. When you're in Egypt, you're pretty limited. You're very, very limited. So a lot of the techniques that they use to make pottery and to make pots, again, doesn't carry over. And it's not because it was too complicated. It's because the area, the environment that they lived in, that they made this stuff in, has resources that other people that practice pottery did not have. Or even vice versa. So, just wanted to answer that question real quick. The next question I had was, will I ever do anything about with geology? Maybe. Geology, it's one of those practices I appreciate. I have a lot of respect for people that study geology. A few of my really good friends are amazing with geology. So I have a lot of respect for it. And I do love, like this one right here that I do love collecting geological quote-unquote treasures like minerals, crystals, rocks, fossils. I love collecting that stuff. But it's not really my forte. I'm not very good at talking about it. Now, if you ask me a question about a rock, yeah, I could answer it. If you ask me a question about a fossil, yeah, I could answer it. But I'm not good enough talking about that stuff into very fine details enough to do a 40 to an hour long video like I'm doing right now. Probably with a lot of research. If I took some time researching the topic, yeah, then I could do a video on it. For now, I don't know if I'm ever going to really do a geology-based video. At least not right now. Okay. The next question I had was, would I ever repeat any of the videos that I've done in the past to kind of go into more detail? Probably not. The most I'm going to do with past topics would be mention them now and then to relate to the current topic, or if somebody just asks another question about it, I might bring it up. If I end up doing this, like, permanently, then months ahead, yeah, I might revisit an old topic, but no, I'm not going to repeat any videos that I've done. Okay, and the last question that we have is going to be actually related to the topic that I want to do, and I'm making a mess over here. But I'll clean that up later. Today's topic was going to kind of relate back to the effigies, because I did do a video talking about effigies and the animal carvings and like the spirit animal beliefs in indigenous Native American tribes. But I pretty much stuck to Native Americans. I didn't go very broad with it. So just because I'm not feeling the best today, this video isn't going to be that long. It's going to be long enough to answer the question I got about the spirit animals and the effigies. So this will probably be a topic I revisit when I'm feeling a little bit better and do a pretty good detailed job on it. But today, we're just going to kind of spend a good bit of time talking about it and answering the questions that I got about animal spiritualism and effigies. So, for today we're really not going to talk just about Native Americans. So instead of using the term Native American, I'm mostly going to just use the term indigenous people because I want to be a little bit more broad with this. And we'll move him out of the way. Kind of right here, yeah, you guys can see him. I have examples of, a few of these are actual effigies, and a few of them are just objects I've had that I'm going to use as examples. Only a few of these are authentic. Most of these are reproductions. The only one that is, I think, authentic is this one right here. Because this was a gift and I've not yet gotten any feedback from the person that gave it to me. But just because there's a lot of imperfections in it, a whole lot of imperfections, I think it's authentic. If not authentic, a really good reproduction. But the rest of these were ones that I've made. I have one that my girlfriend actually made that I'm going to use as an example. And the rest are also gifts. But we're still going to use them for the purpose of this video. So remember, last time that we did touch up on effigies and animal spiritualism. And again, this is something that carries through a bunch of cultures. We find this in Japan. We find this in ancient Egypt. We find this in the Mayans, the Aztecs, our Native Americans. We even find this a little bit in Inuit tribes. Animal spiritualism is a huge deal in our indigenous people. And there's a reason for this. They didn't just blindly worship animals, okay? What you have to realize, if you are part of an indigenous tribe, be it ancient Japan, ancient Egypt, the Mayans, Aztecs, Native Americans, any kind of indigenous people, an ancient tribe, an ancient culture, what you have to realize, animals, pretty much your only source of food. Now, don't get me wrong, we do find that some tribes are strictly farming based. We do find a lot of people that are really good at just farming. However, animals are still your best source of food because you might have a really bad harvest one day, but there's always going to be some kind of animal walking around that you can go shoot with your bow, your spear, whatever, and you're going to have a meal. So because of this, and because our indigenous people had very high respect for animals, because one, they knew these were living creatures. They knew that once they killed that animal, they did kill a living creature. Something that deserved, in their mind, that deer deserved a life just as much as they did, if not more. And they're out there hunting down these animals to kill. Once they kill it, they eat it. That helps them survive. So because of that, animals were seen as the reason these indigenous people were pretty much allowed to live. That's what we find a lot if you look into their belief system. I'm sorry I'm drinking the tea so much. My voice keeps wanting to crack and get dry. I'm trying not to cough on you guys. But that was just their belief system. So animals were held in very, very high respect. And because of that, when we start really looking into it, that's when we start to see animals being worshipped. For example, in some Mayan and Aztec type tribes, what we see is before they even kill this animal to eat it, there's a whole ritual that's held. There's an entire kind of ritualistic practice to prepare this animal to be eaten and also to honor it so that once it's killed and once it goes off, into their version of the afterlife, into little Bambi heaven, once it's killed, this ritual is going to help it move off and it's going to ascend and reincarnate, because reincarnation was a huge deal. Reincarnation is one of those things that's just global among cultures. So animals were literally worshipped, and that's why we start to see effigies being made. And before we start getting really deep into effigies, One question that I did have was, in one of the past videos, you said that wooden effigies weren't really seen. Why is that? And I haven't gone back and watched the last video, so I'm not sure if those were the exact words I used. They very well might have been. But just in case that is what I actually said, I'm going to recommunicate that real quick. What was supposed to be said was wooden effigies, they weren't seen as much as clay or stone based carvings. And the reason for that, wood was a very, very precious material. It was precious. Wood was used for their weapons, wood was used for housing, and fire. Fire is a huge deal to our indigenous people. Fire is very, very precious, and fire was even worshipped. There are entire stories, legends, religions, and mythos based around fire and where fire came from and why it's so valuable and precious. If you look into some of our Greek people, fire was the reason that we are where we are today. You can even look up the story of Prometheus, and in that story, basically, fire came from the gods. So, wood helps make fire. So, wood is very precious. So, wood really wouldn't be wasted to be carved into the likeness of an animal and then left. They would usually make it out of something more permanent, like clay or stone. So, that's why whenever we really find effigies like these, they're not made out of wood. Now, you can find wood carving effigies. It's entirely possible. There are plenty of them out there. They're just not as common. And also, and the person that, Deidre was the one that asked this question, and she also did mention, was it because wood would wear out? And honestly, yeah, wood won't last forever if you just leave it out there. Whereas if you carve an animal effigy out of stone and leave it out there, it's going to last a very long time. It's going to last pretty much forever. That's why whenever we find effigies and carvings like this buried, when we dig them up, they're usually stone or clay, because it does last basically forever, years. But what we really find, and this is one of those global traits I love to talk about, the reason for these effigies was to channel an animal native to that region. And this is where it gets really interesting, because let's say we'll go back to our Native Americans real quick. A very common effigy that you're going to find in Native American would be a wolf, bison, a turtle, or an owl. Those are very, very common effigies to find because those are very commonly seen animals, especially during that period. Not a lot of people realize it, but we used to have bears all over the place. And bears didn't become really extinct in a lot of regions. For example, our region, bears didn't really become extinct until they were hunted to extinction. So bears used to be all over the place. That's why bears are a really common one. And of course, owls. Owls also used to be seen a lot more until deforestation and stuff like that. And of course, turtles. But these are very commonly seen. The reason the turtle is so commonly seen, like this one right here that we have, is because, and when I talk about this, turtle is a very global effigy. Not only is turtle very popular and very common in our Native American cultures, we find turtle all over the place, even in Japan. Turtle's huge in Japan, and the reason for that, you have two reasons. One, in Japan, the turtle effigy relates to the world turtle, and the very common belief that the reason that islands and stuff have been seen, and the reason like tectonic plates, earthquakes splitting the land, places moving, and islands moving, and new islands being formed. The reason for that is because they're all carried on the back of a turtle. And we find this belief carry over into some indigenous tribes, not so much in Native American, but they did have a sort of common belief that I can get into later. But they would make this little turtle effigy and they would put it in water because they want that water to stay around. Water is a very, very important resource. It helps them survive. And we see this in all the tribes, all indigenous tribes. Turtle's very common. And another reason it's so common is because turtle effigies, or turtle in general, isn't purely aquatic. It can also be terrestrial. So you could put it in any kind of body of water. So it's a very broad effigy to use to channel that spirit into a multitude of different type of water sources. And that's one of those that we see global. But let's talk about one that isn't global. And I can't remember if I showed this one before or not. This was one of the gifts that I got. And this is an Inuit jade. This is a form of jade effigy. And this is one that isn't global. And I think it's, just look at the type of animal it is. This little walrus. We don't have walruses around here, but the Inuits saw a walrus all the time. And these were very important animals to those people because they were abundant. And their skin, incredibly insulated. You could make all manner of clothing out of this animal's skin and wear it. So this is another animal that was highly honored. The tusk made excellent weapons. We'll find that with our Inuit tribes, they didn't just make igloos. While igloo was common, it wasn't the only one they made. The ribs of these animals, and whales even, would be used to make tents. They would be used as support. So this is another animal we see being made into an effigy to kind of honor that animal and kind of channel the spirit. This one I'm still doing research on, but frog is another one that we see. And we see frog used mostly in our more tropical cultures. So this one, not very global. While yes, our Native American people would obviously find a frog, they're not as abundant and they're not as really thought of and cared of like our turtles. They didn't seemingly have as many uses. Where when we go and look at our tropical tribes, most of their turtles were pretty much purely aquatic. They did have terrestrial ones, but most of the ones they would have seen are aquatic. Whereas frogs, they would have seen these guys all over the place, and they would, of course, relate to water. So this is another little effigy you could make, and they could also be eaten. But if you compare the tropical cultures to the Native American cultures, Native Americans had deer. But you're not really going to find stuff like that in the tropics, which is why we see such a difference in our effigies. Now, the owl is a pretty common one that's used globally. And owl has a lot of different meanings depending on what culture you look at. To some Native American tribes, the owl is a bad omen. It means that it's basically the bird that comes from hell. But in some other Native American cultures, owl is worshipped. Owl is one of the reasons that fire was brought to the world, and it's one of the reasons that children are protected. Owl is a protector in some cultures, and a harbinger of death and ill omens in other cultures. And this is why effigies are something I love collecting and are absolutely fascinating to me. Because where you see some people worship the animal, you see other people absolutely hate it. Eagle and owl are two huge ones because the owl would be seen as a protector of children. So owl and bear would be two of them that you will find people often give children or put them in the room where children would be sleeping because they're watchers, they're protectors. And in other places, I said that some cultures hate owl. If you really want to mess with your enemy, you could leave an owl effigy to kind of bring and channel that spirit to bring bad luck. So effigies are fascinating. And let me grab it real quick. I should have had that with me already, so give me 1 second, because there's another form of this. Here we go. So animal effigies go even further. They weren't always carvings. Sometimes we find them made into talismans. Now, this I got from Pins and Mounds, and I got it from a family, and these were handmade, and these were Native American handmade, which is really awesome. So while this isn't one that was just dug out of the ground, it's still really valuable because it was made with traditional methods. But if you look at it, it's a turtle. Because turtle is another one of those that is seen as a protector in some cultures because of that hard shell. They're seen as protectors, wherein this is basically going to, give you a little bit more defense, so to say. It's going to help you be a lot tougher, thick-skinned even. So we find animal spiritualism and effigies being worn. And this is why, if you look into a lot of art and clothing and just basically stuff they would carry around, you're going to see animal heads and stuff and imagery all over the place because they seriously honored wildlife. They honored it more than we do because it's how they survived. And we can trace this all over the place. And what's really cool, and I talked about this a little bit in the Native American hunting video, but another way that they would worship these animals, not only with the effigies and the talismans and the imagery, but they would use absolutely every single part of that animal. And the parts that they couldn't turn into tools and the parts they couldn't eat would be kind of set aside, used for jewelry, making and stuff like this. Again, just to keep that animal with them, channel the spirit and stuff like that. So, I have a little bit more to talk about, but I kind of want to pause for a minute because there are so many of you in here right now, and I have been talking for a while. I want to give everybody time to think about what I said and come up with some questions. And since I've spilt my tea, I'm going to grab a napkin real quick because I'm apparently all over the place in this video. But gives y'all some time to ask some questions if you have them. There we go. And actually, I'm going to grab one more example while you guys are thinking of questions. Remember, I said I'm a professional interpreter, so I always have everything I want before I actually start the program. Here we go. And I'll talk about this in a second. Hey, Jacob. Alright, well, if you guys don't have any questions, I'm going to talk about this for a minute. Because this is an example of what I just talked about, where I said that even the parts that couldn't really be made into any kind of tools or really be eaten would still be worn. And this isn't authentic. This was actually made by a really good friend of mine that I work with. And they gave me this. And you can find authentic pieces like this if you study different Native American tribes. So even though this is a reproduction, it's a perfectly made reproduction because it looks just like what an authentic piece would be. but you see little pieces of antler. Yeah, you could turn this into like a knife handle or a spear point, but when they're this small, they're really not going to be able to be used in any kind of effective tool. That's why they wouldn't just toss it aside. It would be made into something. Because again, nothing goes to waste. Every single bit has to be used. And when we look at effigy carving, they would even take it further. Animal imagery would even go into their tobacco use. You can find different type of tobacco pipes, peace pipes, quote unquote, even though they really weren't called that. They were just called pipes. But you'll find his evidence of those, and if you ever look at one really good, you can interpret an animal out of it because it is an animal. But what you gotta remember, it's not going to be the perfect likeness of an animal. Why? Because they carved this out of stone or clay, using their bare hands, sticks, stones, and deer antlers. It's not going to be perfect. But if one of us went out there right now with rock, clay, deer antlers, a bunch of sticks and stone in our bare hands, no modern day tools, we would not be able to make a perfect tobacco pipe the way that they did and make it look that close like an animal. But the reason for this, we find a lot of their religious practices fall into summoning the spirit of that animal. And the reason the pipes were used, Native Americans used actual hallucinogenics like peyote. Peyote was a big one. But they would smoke hallucinogenics. And they didn't do this just to get high, have a good time, and go party. They actually thought that this is giving them spiritual visions. And the reason that pipe would have the vision of an animal, they would have a bunch of different pipes in the vision of an animal that they want to kind of channel. So a lot of the pipes we see are birds, some kind of bird, because birds, they're overlookers. They're flying around. You can channel your spirit into a bird, so to speak, and scout around, find what you're looking for. So birds were a huge form of imagery in the pipes, and it was used in those ritualistic and spiritual practices. Other effigies we find, and this one is another Inuit jade carving. It's a little Inuit and he's fishing, which this is my favorite one just because I love fishing, and this is so beautifully done. But you'll find effigies like this in the likeness of people. And it could either be that this was a carving of a leader, like a chief. It was a great warrior that went down in battle and he should be honored. Or it could have just been a close family member. And what we sometimes see is they would make effigies in the likeness of another tribe's chief and give it to him as a gift, as a kind of like a peace offering, a treaty gift. So effigies didn't just stop at animals, but animals were the biggest part. And that's just a few reasons why. And we could go a lot deeper than this, but because this topic can be taken in so many different directions, I want to keep it kind of sectioned off. So that's all I had today. This is going to be a topic that we will revisit just because it can go in a bunch of different places. But I'll keep the video up for just a few minutes longer in case y'all had any questions, want me to repeat something, or if you have, of course, again, any ideas for future topics. Again, I'm not feeling the best, and I'm wanting to take some time to think of some really good topics to talk about. So this is probably going to be the last video for a few days. Long enough for me to think of some topics. I know I said that in the last video, but then I got a lot of feedback about the animal spiritualism and effigies, so I wanted to go ahead and talk about that today. But that's all I had. I'll keep it up for just a few more minutes so you guys can ask questions. And I'm going to look at my notes and make sure that I did answer all the questions that people asked. Okay, now I did forget one question, so I'm going to answer that real quick. One of the questions that I had, or that I got, goes back to the hunting video that we talked about. And the person asked, I'm just going to read it how they asked it. They said, you said that no part of the animal was ever wasted and that they used every single bit, even what they couldn't eat. What would they do with veins, muscle, and sinew? That's an excellent question. The veins, the muscle, the sinew, stuff like that, that's actually what they would turn into string. Because they couldn't just go out and get string like we can today. And they didn't always have access to leather. Most of the time, the leather would not be wasted just for straps. It would be saved for clothing and, pouches and stuff like that. So sinew, the muscle, the veins and stuff like that would be used for string. They would use that to, a lot of time, pretty much all the time, that's what ties or binds the arrowhead, the axe head, the spear point to the stick. And that's what they would use for their little talismans, like my turtle talisman here. So that was an excellent question, and I'm really glad somebody asked that because I didn't talk about it in the hunting video. But now I've answered all the questions. It doesn't look like you guys have any. So we're going to go ahead and end it. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Again, start thinking of some topics to give me because otherwise it might be a few days until I do another video. At the most, I'm going to wait until I feel better. So Alex, I actually did a past video about that. I'll have to look at the video again because I'm not sure how in depth I got with what each part would be made out of. I'm pretty sure I covered each piece that would be made into a major tool though. But I'll go back and find that video, rewatch it, and I'll send it to you in a message if I did talk about everything you just asked. But if I didn't, then yeah, I can do a video on that. I'll go back and find the video and send it to you. It's fine. Unless you want to comb through them. Alright, but if nobody else has any questions, I answered all the questions in my notes. Start thinking of some topics. Again, start thinking of just any questions you want because that gives me a reason to make a video. Hope y'all enjoyed it. And that's all for today. Thank y'all.